When a narcissist tilts their head, narrows their eyes, and says, "So what you're really saying is," that moment is never innocent. Psychologists widely recognize this move as a subtle form of linguistic entrapment, a manipulation technique designed to redirect the conversation away from truth and toward their preferred narrative. Most people already know what narcissists do when they feel their grip slipping: gaslighting, deflecting, accusing, escalating. But the real danger begins long before these overt tactics ever appear. What most survivors fail to recognize are the precursors, the micro traps, the conversational feints, the small shifts that reveal the narcissist is setting the stage. If you can catch these early cues, before the twist, before the blame, you gain a unique advantage. You can stop their psychological extraction without sounding defensive, without over-explaining, and without letting them seize control of the emotional terrain. I've spent 2 decades studying self-worth, traumatic bonding, and narcissistic relational patterns as a coach, an author, and someone who survived these dynamics firsthand. And the deeper I explored, the clearer the pattern became. Narcissistic communication operates much like a behavioral algorithm: predictable, rehearsed, and optimized for control. In this breakdown, I'm going to expose 3 of the most effective conversational traps narcissists use, and the 3-word response that disarms each one. But before we analyze techniques, we need to understand the psychology behind them. Why do narcissists twist your words in the first place? What is happening beneath the surface of that seemingly harmless phrase? What you're really saying is, imagine a pickpocket in a crowded plaza. He's smiling, harmless, maybe even charming. He brushes past someone's shoulder, murmurs a polite "oops," and drifts on. The interaction feels meaningless, barely a ripple in the day's rhythm. But hours later, the victim discovers that something essential is gone: a wallet, an ID, access to their accounts. And only then do they understand the gravity of that tiny bump. Psychologists often use this metaphor for covert manipulators. Not overtly violent, not openly threatening, but stealthy enough that their damage is noticed only in hindsight. Pickpockets operate through 3 quick psychological maneuvers: the approach, the distraction, the extraction. Narcissists do the same, only they steal something far more valuable than money: your clarity, your emotional equilibrium, your sense of reality. The approach is the friendliness, the easy tone, the conversational bump that feels casual and harmless. It's not random, it's rehearsed. Narcissists rely on this soft opening because it disarms the nervous system. Your brain reads the social cues as non-threatening, lowering its guard. Then comes the distraction, a slight shift in tone, a comment that catches your attention just long enough to pull you off your center. In that moment, while you're focused on the small thing they misquoted or misunderstood, the extraction is already in motion. A narcissist's version of extraction is not physical, it is psychological. They siphon your emotional labor, your attentiveness, your instinctive need to repair misunderstandings. And by the time you notice how drained you feel, the damage is done. That's the invisible cost of their strategy. Now, let's look at how this plays out in a real conversation. Suppose yesterday you said something simple and unthreatening. "I'm not sure if I can make it to your party." It was neutral, grounded, honest. But today they turn to you with a wounded expression and declare, "I guess I'll just go alone since you don't care about my family." That deliberate misquote is the bump, the approach. It is subtle but psychologically intentional. According to relationship therapists, narcissists use misrepresentation as a way to create emotional imbalance. You feel caught off guard, and the natural human tendency is to assume a misunderstanding rather than malice. So you explain, you clarify, you soften your words, you take emotional responsibility for their distortion. And in that moment, your focus shifts from holding your boundary to managing their feelings. That shift is the distraction. And then comes the extraction. Narcissists don't just want you to correct the record, they want to watch you work. They want to see how quickly you abandon your position, how desperately you try to appease them, how emotionally invested you are in appearing kind or fair. Psychologists describe this as empathic exploitation, where your emotional intelligence becomes their leverage. They sit back, emotionally detached, while your nervous system scrambles to restore harmony. That scramble is their victory. It reassures them that they still have the power to make you contort yourself. It reinforces their belief that they are superior, unreachable, and untouchable. This is not misunderstanding. It is strategic emotional theft. But you don't have to fall for it. There is a 3-word response that shuts this entire strategy down. Before I reveal it, you need to see another example, because knowing exactly when to use it is just as important as knowing the words themselves. So picture another classic pickpocket scenario. Someone who approaches looking confused, holding a crumpled map, fumbling with directions. Their performance is crafted to activate your empathy long enough to make you vulnerable. Narcissists do the exact same thing in conversations. They appear lost, wounded, or confused right before they strike. When a narcissist tilts their head and says, "Excuse me, can you help me understand what you meant?" it mirrors the classic lost tourist con. Not because they are confused, but because they need you distracted. Psychologists describe this as a form of covert dominance testing, where the narcissist creates artificial uncertainty to see whether you'll abandon your internal compass to guide them. And the moment you lean in emotionally, mentally, or verbally, the trap is already set. You begin explaining yourself, softening your tone, walking them through your words like a map they already know how to read. This is the exact point where caring individuals lose their footing. Empaths and conscientious people instinctively want to clarify, to ease tension, to ensure mutual understanding. But to a narcissist, that instinct is not kindness, it's access. It's the opening through which they siphon your certainty, your steadiness, and your sense of self. They don't do this because they are genuinely confused. Psychologists emphasize that this tactic is rooted in narcissistic boredom, emotional hunger, or a dip in self-importance. When they feel the spotlight dimming, they manufacture a moment that requires you to center them again. Beneath the surface, this behavior is fueled by profound insecurity, a fear of irrelevance so unbearable that they must provoke you into restoring their emotional oxygen. And as you scramble to clarify your tone, your intent, your meaning, their ego slowly reinflates. Watching you work for their comfort gives them a potent surge of control. It reassures them that they can still bend your internal experience to match their needs. That moment, psychologists say, is the narcissist's emotional jackpot, observing your self-doubt flicker to life. But this tactic doesn't stop with feigned confusion. Narcissists also rely on the drop, another classic misdirection borrowed from real-world con artists. The drop seems accidental, keys falling to the floor, a scarf slipping from a pocket. In conversation, it's the emotional equivalent, a sudden jab disguised as humor. You say something harmless like, "I didn't sleep well last night," and they grin and reply, "Oh, was our deep conversation too much for your sensitive nerves?" Outwardly, it's playful, but clinically, psychologists call this covert denigration, a subtle undermining move that triggers your instinct to correct their perception of you. And just like bending down to pick up the fallen item, you instinctively reach for the emotional bait. You reassure them that you're not sensitive, that they didn't overwhelm you, that you're still easygoing and stable. In that moment, the extraction is complete. They've confirmed their ability to make you justify your existence. Here's the part most survivors never understand until years later. These tactics are not random. They are calculated, they are learned, and they are reinforced every time you take the bait. Narcissists rarely escalate to overt manipulation unless their subtler strategies fail. The drop, the bump, the confusion, they are early-stage attempts to reclaim emotional dominance. And the psychological damage they inflict is cumulative. Each time you clarify something that didn't need clarification, your nervous system encodes a message. Keep the peace, stay small, over-explain. Over time, victims develop what psychologists call fawn conditioning, where your survival instinct becomes tied to managing someone else's emotional turbulence. That's why awareness is your first and most powerful line of defense. Just as a seasoned traveler instantly notices the setup of a street con, an oddly timed bump, an unnecessary question, a staged accident, you must train yourself to recognize the emotional setups in conversation. Your goal is not to confront, argue, or teach them how to behave. Psychologists consistently warn that confrontation only triggers narcissistic injury, followed by retaliation. Your job is simply to clock the setup, to feel the internal shift, to notice when something in the dynamic suddenly feels off. That single moment of awareness is what breaks the psychological trance. This is why the internal phrase, "something isn't right," is so powerful. It pulls your attention away from them and recenters it on you. This is a technique rooted in trauma-informed therapy, shifting from external monitoring to internal grounding. When you say something isn't right, you interrupt the reflex to reassure, defend, or fix. You neutralize the bait. You stop the extraction before it begins. Psychologists describe this as rewiring your threat response, moving from people-pleasing reflexes to conscious self-protection. Once you see the trap, you no longer feel compelled to walk into it. You don't pick up the dropped scarf. You don't explain the misquote. You don't lean in to soothe their faux confusion. You stay upright, emotionally unbent. You protect your energy the way a traveler protects their wallet, not with drama, but with quiet awareness. You might change the subject. You might keep your tone neutral. You might simply fall silent. What you don't do is perform. The beauty of this skill is that it restores something narcissistic relationships are designed to erode: your internal authority. You begin trusting your instincts again. You start noticing subtle shifts sooner. You respond not from fear, but from clarity. And as psychologists often remind survivors, clarity is kryptonite to a manipulator. When you stop reacting, the spell shatters. The narcissist loses their access to your energy, and without your participation, their tactics fall flat. You break the cycle not by overpowering them, but by refusing to play. Thank you for watching. YouTube thinks the video on your screen now is the one you'll need next, and they're probably right. Click it to go even deeper into decoding narcissistic patterns, protecting your emotional resilience, and rebuilding the grounded, powerful life you deserve. I'll meet you over there.